Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On the show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, and more, including smaller deals that you can do without significant capital. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest podcast. Let's get started. Kevin Davis, a native of Brooklyn, so am I, spent much of his childhood reciting original poems and rhymes influenced by the hip-hop craze like any other inner-city child in the 1980s. In 1989, he was signed as a rapper to Warner Brothers Records. At age 23, he had his first hit record called Stomp and toured the world for 5 years. He became a stockbroker in 1995, inspired by the Eddie Murphy movie Trading Places, when the music career fizzled out. This led him into the jaws of the infamous Stratton Oakmont featured in The Wolf of Wall Street after a short 2 years in a boiler room shop. He was recruited by wirehouse firms and ended up working in a small research shop. Wow, what a transition from the two interesting worlds. This experience 25 years later led to the development of Investment Dojo, the world's first social trading competition application. After approximately 3 years in the making, the application finally launched April 13, 2024. The app effectively gamifies the stock market. The initial feedback is that it's fun, exhilarating, and more importantly, wildly educational. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Corey.
So listen, we got some things in common. We spoke a little bit in the pre-call. We're both Brooklyn boys talking about New York pizza, and we both don't live mainly in New York anymore. So
we're smart.
And my wife comes out of the spoken word hip hop scene. I did not grow up in it, but I've married into it. But the journey is interesting. But we want to delve into that. We want to delve into the deals you did previously. We got an interesting take on what we're going to talk about in terms of your current business and deals. But before we get all into that, and then maybe the bio gives it away, unlike some of the guests, but usually I say, hey, what did you want to be when you were growing up, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old? Because it probably isn't what you're doing now. But you tell me, was it music from that early age or was it something before that?
It was something before. I used to be an artist. I can draw. Yeah. And so I did an internship with Marvel Comics as my last 6 months in high school. Wow. And I got a chance to watch Stan Lee walk by me every single day. The creators of Thor, all of these different characters. It was amazing. I mean, amazing. And so I wanted to be an artist, graphic artist, and I wanted to do computer science. So that's how I ended up here, I guess.
I love it. Well, again, I mentioned my wife, but she was a chemistry and computer science double major, and then ended up in the spoken word hip hop world and touring an album, whatever. So, I get just sort of, not that many people have that disparate background, but certainly you guys both do. And okay, and looking back, one other thing, what was the first deal of any type you did? I don't know if it was early in your music career, something.
My first deal was getting my own record deal with Warner Brothers. I was the first rapper signed to the direct print of Warner Brothers Records. So that was my first deal. My second deal was my own again. I got another deal through the WIA system, Warner Electra and Atlantic. And so I got a deal with Elektra Records with Sylvia Rome. And then that was my last record deal. And then I started managing artists. So I was managing my buddy Rozelle from The Roots. Uh-huh. And, they're kind of notorious at this point. And then I executive produced his first album, and then I came back. And it's a funny thing. I was shopping one of his records to Funkmaster Flex. And he was playing at the Hammerstein Ballroom. Sure. And I'm walking, and I forgot I had an MCA tag on me because I got it from my buddy. And these two little guys walked up to me, and it was Cain and Abel from Master P's record label. And Master P, it's just funny how things happen. And Master P had kind of disbanded, or everybody kind of left them because of publishing at that point. And so I didn't know why they came up to me. And then I realized I had the tag, and they said, listen, can you help us get a deal? And I was like, yeah. So then I got together with them, had lunch with them, and then I went up to my buddy, Merlin Bob, who worked up at Elektra Records. And I said to him, listen, I don't know where to take this, record, but I need your help. Will you help me? He's like, sure. So we go up there. I haven't seen him in a while. He took me out for sushi. We had lunch. We're yapping. And then I'm about to leave the office. I said, hey, didn't you want to play something for me? Oh, yeah, that's right. That's why I came up here. So then I played the record for him. It was an album, and he lost his mind. I mean, his entire mind. Now, I psychologically kind of hit him because I knew that if I went up there and say, listen, I need a record deal, that wasn't going to work. I needed him to make it his idea. So he heard it. He said, did Sylvia hear this record? I said, no. Okay, hold on. I'll be right back. So he goes down the office to Sylvia. He sets up the meeting. He says, who's your lawyer? My lawyer was Clive Davis's son, Fred Davis. So I was like, okay. The next day, I get a call. Sylvia wants to do the record, but I had already went to Craig Cowdelman at Atlantic Records, and now Atlantic Records was in a bidding war between, Sylvia Rome and Elektra, and it was the greatest thing. So Sylvia Rome was like the female gangster. She was just like this. You don't mess with Sylvia, right? Yeah. I mean, she made it from the receptionist all the way up to the president of the label, right? So she's pretty tough. So she calls me up and she goes, Kevin, if you ever want another deal with me, you're going to take this one. And I wanted to deal with Sylvia. So I said, okay. And that was the first deal I got. After that, it was pretty much music bound. I got a deal for Beats by the Pound, which was Master P's production team up at Tommy Boy Records. And then I actually sold the record to 50 Cent. That was a really big record for him, and Snoop Dogg, called Pimp Like Me, in a 7-record deal that I sold to Dr. Dre. So those were my histories and my history in the music business in terms of deals.
So question for that. Obviously, the music industry has changed very significantly since those days in terms of the way deals get done, the influence of record deals, the ability to put out independent music and get a distribution, on your own, and all the apps and you name it. But, there are many, many industries that are not just in the record industry that have gatekeepers, that have, back then it was really, you didn't get a record deal, there weren't as many options.
But at the same time, if you did get a record deal back then, you actually had a hit record.
Right. So, what is that like just in general? Like, I mean, you want to talk about feet to the fire, real, deal making in a tough business. What are some of the things that, you learned about, deals and how to get them done, or mistakes, things not to do?
I guess the toughest part was getting the artists around to the understanding that they had to make an album and had not just a single.
Yeah.
Right. And because it really was always up to the music. It was never really up, because the day has changed now. Before it was about BDS spins. Now it's about YouTube views, TikTok, Instagram. So it was a lot different. It was also about street buzz. So if you had, like back then, you could sell a CD. Remember those things? Yeah. CDs, right, out the back of your car in the South. And you could sell 10,000. If you sold 10,000 CDs, the label wanted to meet you.
Yeah.
Right? Now it's about streams and spins, not spins, but streams and views. But the reality back then, as far as, I'm not sure if there was, mistakes, but what I learned this from the music machine is that you had to have the distribution, you had to have the push, you had to have the budget. And, you could be in the other part where you're just kind of like the write-off, or you can really get out there and hustle. And you can't let a record label determine your success. They're really the distribution and marketing arm, but your product, so you got to get out there and market. So we did a lot of that.
Yeah. And, and it's interesting because I've seen that in other worlds. I mean, people make the mistake when they publish books, these days, or they start podcasts even, they think, especially with books, I mean, nowadays, even if you get a major book deal, they're not necessarily, the advances are not what they were. You better be able to market that book and have a following, and they may jump on board once they see you get some traction, but they're not going to make you. They'll give you some distribution and get you out there, but then they're not going to sell your book for you if you're not, at least if you're not creating momentum first.
Yeah, this is about something. I'm into it now because I have a friend of mine. She, very close friend of mine. I've trained her in the insurance business, did a couple of things with her. So I go to her house yesterday, and she was holding some frozen mangoes for me because she has a mango tree, right? And she says, I'm making $10,000 to $12,000 a day. I'm like, great, right? How are you doing it? She's like, I have these Instagram channels and they have thousands, hundreds of thousands of viewers, and I just sell digital products. And I said, that's cool. So to answer the question, you have to have a backing. You have to have an audience for what you're doing now, right? And that's the way you kind of move because, 100 years ago, we talked about cottage industries. Now you move forward, you have AI and you have social media. And if you know how to generate eyeballs, because people are more interested in everybody else's life and the magic pill. Right. So fear, frustration, these are the things that are being sold. And those are the things that people are buying. Right. So if you can't generate an audience off of that, you're not going to be able to sell your products. And that's what's happening on that end. And in the music business, the same way. You need to have an audience because at least if you got 1 million followers, you're going to be able to do shows. There's show money because now these days they sign you to 360 deals. So they get your show money, your publishing and your record, publishing, and I think there's one more thing I'm missing, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, you're right. It used to be in the old days, right, that the tour money, went to the artist, right? That's how they, because on a lot, at least in some of the deals, right?
That was their money. That was, yeah.
And, especially because on a lot of these record company deals, by the time they got paid back all the expenses and the creative accounting or whatever, there wasn't a lot of money left for the artists, right?
Yeah, because this is how they got paid. Let's say you had a record deal. Like if you had a 13% royalty, you were like Mariah Carey. Yeah. So let's say you had 7 points on a record and they give you $1 million and that record sold 10 million records. And let's say you made, $5 million, but they gave you $1 million advance, spend $1 million on a video. They gave you $1 million for this. And now you're in the hole because it all comes out of that 7%. It's a record. It makes sense. If you're in the right business, but most of the time we were on the wrong side of the deal.
Yeah. And it was tougher back then. Listen, I joked with you before the show that I didn't grow up in hip hop, but I married into it. And so, and I know that, in the early days of hip hop, before the record companies were even picking people up because they didn't know if it was like, going to be
because it was fad.
Right? It was a fad. Exactly. There was, a lot of the early artists, were hustling because that was the only thing that was available, and then of course the industry came around. But, you had like folks like Immortal Technique and others that stayed in, independent. It was like, I'm not doing the record deal. I'll keep everything I sell.
Tech Nine, Immortal Technique, Chance the Rapper these days. Yeah. And that's where the money is. That even if you listen to what's happening now on the deal structure side, they're going into distribution now because it's not enough money. Like, okay, so you have all of these major artists that have these catalogs selling to their publishing right now, right? And to me, that's just it. I'm a long-term investor, so that's kind of foolish to me, right? Yeah. Because they're going to the sync rights. There's so much in that music that they can make money from over the long term, but they're taking this short-term pleasure, long-term pain route. To me, it's just my opinion. So they gotta. Here's my thought process. If someone's willing to give you $50 million for your music catalog, what are they going to make off of it?
Right. They're not multiples of that. That's for
right. Sure. They're not gifting you.
Yeah.
So when you think about it from that standpoint, yeah, it's really lopsided, but it's always been that way. An artist really, it's like I tell my wife, if we were out, my friends, I'm known as the hustler. My wife is known as the hippie. Right. So I'm the guy who gets it done. My wife is the one that, I'll just paint today. Right. So now the artist is like that. I'll just paint today. The business is not going to be taken care of, though. And so that's what's happening in music.
Love it. All right. So, you're an artist. Now you're managing some artists, getting some deals done. And then, in your bio, it seems to jump to becoming a stockbroker, right? Like, so how do we go from one to the other? What's that journey look like? So most people don't wake up one day and say, oh, I'm an artist manager, and I'm going to go, work and be a stockbroker.
You can blame that on Eddie Murphy, Trading Places. I saw that.
Really was that movie, huh? Wow.
I was enamored. I sat there and this is back when we had cassettes. Remember? Yeah, 8-track, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Big cassettes, VHS. And I was watching the movie and I was like, I want to do that. I want to do that. And I remember this distinctly. I was sitting in front of my grandmother's home in Flushing, Kew Gardens, Queens. Yeah. And my neighbor, who worked for Stratton Oakmont at the time, and I had no clue what Stratton Oakmont was.
Sure.
She goes, listen, if you're serious, I can take you to my firm. I'm like, oh, thank you. Let's go. So she takes me, and I never forget that day I got interviewed. It was pretty amazing. A guy by the name of Bobby Koch, I'm sitting in the lunchroom, and he comes in and he goes, so what makes you think you could be a stockbroker? Now, let me give you some color. I'm a street guy. My mentality is you're not going to shake me. So I kind of got in his face and said, what makes you think you could be a stockbroker? And it went back and forth. And I didn't care. I thought I was over. He's like, I like you. And pulled me in and hired me. It was amazing.
Well, listen, I mean, knowing what I know about both those industries, and certainly, I mean, boy, I remember Stratton Oakmont and many of those firms, so I graduated law school in 1985, right? So in that boom time in the 80s, I was a young lawyer. We were targets for everybody who was pushing some next hot penny stock or whatever it was, or, Pink Sheet, whatever, or something was supposedly going to go IPO next week, whatever it was. They got a list of us guys. So we used to get calls on this stuff all the time, with stock tips. And then obviously, I mean, Stratton Oakmont themselves have become infamous with the Wolf of Wall Street story and movie and book. But, I do think, I mean, listen, if you're able, I mean, especially in that kind of environment, if you're able to hustle on a music career and cut deals for artists and whatever, I mean, it's, it's very similar skills. It's just different products.
Yeah, it doesn't change. It's determination, work ethic, and tenacity.
Yeah.
And so you're learning something new. In this case, I was a fish out of water, but this is where the lines blurred for me. People who didn't look like me, that didn't know where I came from, put me underneath their wing. And they said, I stood all day. I would get there 5 a.m. and I would stand until like 12 midnight. And they would look at me like, what is wrong with this kid? And so they just developed a nice admiration for me. They take me blue fishing, paintballing, although I think the paintballing was an ulterior scheme just to shoot paintballs at me. But it was, but it was so much fun. But, and once I got around to learning about the business, I realized why they didn't want anyone in there with a license, because you were too smart. You would figure it out. When you didn't know anything, you were like, well, you don't know you're doing wrong unless, you have knowledge. Once you figure it out, then you have to peel back, right? So once I figured out what they would do, this is amazing. They would pick a opening account stock, right? So that can be Quaker Oats, Apple. And then when the check hits, it was check hit trade. So as soon as the check came in from the investor for the first initial, usually a $3,000, $5,000 first initial stock purchase, then they would raise, they would pitch him $250,000 to $1 million worth of stock. And then they're probably raising anywhere from 100 to 180 to 200,000, right? And they knew who they had on the telephone, because we really called the richest people in America. So that was the deal. And it was just an amazing thing. I always think back, if they would have did it right, I probably would have never been here, because we were so good at what we were doing. If we could have just did it right, it would have been amazing.
Wow.
That's why I didn't stay at the firm after it went out. I didn't go to another firm like it. I said, okay, I went to a firm in the city. That one, it was a publicly traded company. Then that went out of business. And then I went to a research firm, and that's when I learned how to actually research stocks. And I left the order taking mentality out. And then it became really successful. Yeah.
Yeah. So that evolution, I mean, if there's anything else you want to share in between, but I see sort of that evolution as a logical, lead up to what you're doing now, right?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. It definitely morphed into that, but I had a couple of pit stops along the way here too. When I left Wall Street. I moved to Florida, right? I still have my license. They enabled me to still trade for a second until a certain period because they didn't have a 24 and I didn't want to take my 24 license. So I said, okay. Then I went and opened up a mortgage company. And then I had that since 5 to 2008. And then you know what happened in 2008, right?
Plus.
And then now I went from, famine to feast to famine again.
Yeah.
And so then I had to figure that out. And the next, I ended up at a unionized life insurance company that said I can get my own franchise. So I want to get in a deal with a franchise. And I moved back from Florida I moved up north. I went to Maryland and I was there for about 7 years. I built my renewal accounts, wildly successful there. And then I retired and came back in 2017, worked for 2 years with my buddy who I started with just so my renewals would drop into my accounts. It did. And then I retired and then COVID hit. And that's where this thing came out.
I love it. I love it. So before we get to this thing, which is, what we're going to talk about you doing currently and your viewpoint on deals related to that. So you were, the insurance is a franchise thing. And I know like when a lot of people think about franchises, they think about like fast food and, that kind of stuff. But there are many other franchise models that are not in retail or food or
Absolutely.
things like that. And, and that's a deal, right? To be a franchisee to, So let's talk a little bit about, you hear different things in different franchise models. What people tend to like about them is that you have a system and a model and a brand and all that kind of stuff. Other people, and especially now, and, you are and you have been in the past, an entrepreneur with 100% control over your own business. Obviously, in a franchise, there's some limiting factors that sometimes frustrate folks. So talk about your franchise experience in that kind of deal model.
Interesting. So they said to me, the reason why, because let me back up. In the mortgage company, you're making 6 figures a week in some cases.
Yeah.
Right. So now you have to take a step back in the car you're driving. You're looking at the note, like, how are you going to maintain that? Right. Yeah. So then I go to the insurance company and they say to me, and this is the thing that hooked me. They said, if you work hard, you write X amount of business and you do it in a certain period of time, you can have your own franchise. I said, okay, I'll be right back. And I'll never forget my first day on the phone. So I had to learn their script, did all of that. And I did something very interesting. I was so used to making cold calls because I was a stockbroker. They gave me leads that were warm leads. It was a unionized life insurance company. So I was dealing with the Teamsters and all the locals, like the United States Postal Service, all of that, they're unions. So it was easy to call someone that knew you, right? And they still, people are people. So you still have to kind of work a little bit, but it was a warm lead, right? So what I realized, I'll never forget, they gave me 50 leads. I had 2 cell phones. I called from each phone at least twice. I got 8 appointments. I wrote $5,300 in business. I got a check for like $4,000 my first week there. And I looked at the check like, what am I going to do with this? So then they looked at me like, who's the superstar? I looked at them like, there's got to be more than life than this. So then going through the whole process, I realized something. If I keep trying to get leads from them, I'm going to be dependent on the system. So I said, I have to create my own system. And the one thing I learned was that education is how I sold. I never sold anything. I taught my clients. So when I taught them, I realized I can get their whole cell phone book. So I was getting like 300 referrals from one house. Wow. And it was all systematic. Because then what would happen next is that I'd say, hey, you have to send everybody a text. So, hey, my insurance guy's going to call you. It's open enrollment, so be nice. So they send that text. Naturally, smiley face, explanation point. They laugh out loud. Then I say, okay, anyone return that text? Yeah, it's a lot. Okay, good. We're going to call them. So then I called them all, made appointments from that day. And I realized if I saw them the same day, I sold 95% of those people. If I sold them the day after, I sold 80% of those people. And there's one component that I figured out was that people didn't know anything about insurance, just like they didn't know anything about mortgages, real estate, or the stock market. So once I educated them and they found out that what they had was good for the temporary situation, but not for the long term, they wanted to do business with me and they passed me over. That allowed me to write $1.6 million in about 18 months. They gave me my own pick. It's funny, they gave me Chicago, Maryland, and Kansas. It's like, who goes to Kansas? So I said, no disrespect to Kansas out there, but no, I'm not going to Kansas. So I went to Maryland, and 7 years later, I did something they didn't think I could do. It was great.
Wow. So when you say meaning that was where you had your franchise?
Yes.
Great.
And I had Maryland, DC, Virginia, West Virginia, Northern Virginia.
Great. Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business, Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to coreycupford.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back to the show. All right, let's tell people about what you're doing now, and because it's really, really, really interesting. And then we'll talk about some of the deals you've been approached by. But let's get to what's the business. What do you work on?
The name of the business is Investment Dojo. We are a socially trading app, meaning we gamify the stock market and we moderate the game. So we teach people in masterclass style if we're moderating that game. So, I just had one close. I'm still moderating game as we speak today. So it's a pretty cool idea. Group chats, leaderboards, and, my method of teaching is masterclass. So I really give them a real in-depth thought process, and we set it up where we meet maybe 3 or 4 times during a competition. So it's a little bit unique because most apps, you just get on, you play, you mind your business, you never have any contact. So I got a team of people that help me, and we kind of do that. How did it come about? COVID, like most things happen. I was retired. I didn't want to do anything else. My friends kind of said, listen, Kev, you're really good at this stock market thing. I said, okay, and what? And they were like, well, you should teach us. I said, I don't want to. I just retired. And then COVID hits and they go, Kevin, you should teach us. I go, I don't want to. And I definitely don't want to see you. So because of COVID. So then they kept pounding me. Stock market's going crazy. I said, okay, I'll start a group. That group went from 29 people to 6,300 people overnight almost. I started doing these contests online, with Investopedia. And they were the most fun, wildest educational contests ever. People would lose their mind. And, people would always ask me, do you coach? And I was like, no, I don't coach. So then all of a sudden, I had to figure out how I was going to do that. So then next I started coaching people in the stock market, and my track record is really, really good to this day. And that's how that business started. But when Investopedia, the site went down, I said, okay, there's got to be a better way. And my buddy was like, listen, you capitalize, stop being stingy, go build an app. I was like, okay, I don't know where to start. I don't have a clue. I called my wife. My wife has a marketing degree. She found the company in India, no less. And I was like, okay, but all the things I hear about India, you sure? And she said, no, I vetted them. I said, okay. So we did it. I sent my first check on my mother's birthday, which is today, my mother's birthday. Hilarious, right? And
by the way, that today, folks, is when we're recording it, not when it's airing.
Exactly right. So on my So on my mother's birthday, we sent the check, and 3 years later, the app was born. Now, mind you, they told me it would take 6 months. Sure. But I didn't mind. It was a labor of love. So the app was launched April 13th of this year, 2024. Right now, we're just in the beginning stages. We have about 1,500 downloads, and I don't market. So everything's kind of word of mouth through my Facebook and through my social media. I just hit 11,000 people on TikTok, and I'm just starting to build my audience. Yeah. So I got a couple of things in mind.
Love it. All right. So despite the fact that you're early, you've been already approached with some potential deals. Mm-hmm. And, one of the things that, might be interesting that on the Deals podcast that we're going to talk about, and people actually, my regular listeners know, I actually did a solo cast called why you shouldn't do a deal on a deals podcast, all right, a while back. And the reason I did that is because it's interesting. Like even I was running this M&A conference, which we mentioned, before we went on air for Entrepreneurs Organization, the Deal Exchange Conference. And I have a talk that I did there that I did at the Global Leadership Conference in Singapore called There's a Deal for That, right? It's like there's an app for that, there's a deal for that, right? Yes. And the premise is that there is, for any business problem issue that you have, whether it's hiring, whether it's getting into a new market, you name it, there is a deal for that. And I believe that. However, the corollary to that is just because there's a deal for that doesn't mean you should do it, right? It's just it's a tool in the toolbox. You can grow organically, you can grow slower, you can do different. So my point is sort of twofold, which may seem attention, but it's really not, that you should understand all the different types of deals you can do to grow your business, but that doesn't mean you have to do any of them, right? But it should be something you're aware of. So you obviously have a deal background in whether it's, coming out of the music scene, all that kind of stuff. So talk a little bit about the kinds of deals that people have already approached you with, even though you're relatively early stage in this new venture, but obviously you've got a reputation and track history, and why you've chosen not to do some of them.
Because it's the level of control and the input. What I found, and as I talked to a couple of my friends, she has an app and she took $300K, and that deal never came to fruition because of the push and pull. One of the things is when it's your baby, it's like, okay, when I invest in a company, I'm investing in the founder and his vision, right? So if someone's going to invest in me, it has to be the same way. Automatically, you don't get to wake up and say, I have a vision. Well, where was your vision when I created the company? It was non-existent. So you have to let the person who got the vision, and I understand that, lead the company, but I understand that what got you there won't get you there. But as I tell people, I'd rather go slow, right? I was in Atlanta about 3 weeks ago, the 23rd of August. Yeah, around there. And I get a call, I get a text, and, could you call me back? Someone on TikTok. And I said, I thought they were at the conference, because they said, could we meet? I'm figuring, how do you know I'm here? So you must be here. So, okay, I'll call you. So I called him, and he says, I want to partner with you, and I want to, take part in, helping you build your company. And although I was flattered and humbled, I had to decline, just because the vision that I have here is for my son and for my daughter. Now, as I stated in the past, they said, well, if someone offered you, is there a number that you would sell? I said, yeah, there's a number that I would exit. Yes, of course. If that allows me another doorway to enter, that's a bigger doorway, sure. But if someone offered me $10 million, would I take it? No, of course not. It doesn't make sense, right? So it's really about having a certain amount of control to build the vision. And what I think is that I know what this could be worth, right, down the road. This is just the first layer. I'll be back. Let me work. Let me cook. Yeah.
Well, and that raises an interesting question. Even if you're somebody who's open to, let's say, taking in investment capital, whether that's angel VC, eventually private equity, whatever, when is it appropriate to do that? Obviously, it's much more expensive capital the earlier you are. So, like, how much do you want to bet on yourself and what you can create without the additional money? And I think that there are too many entrepreneurs who haven't been through it before, who actually think money is the solution to, and it's often not. I mean, it's different if you're at a later stage. What investment capital is really, really good at. I mean, listen, there are some folks who just can't get something off the ground unless maybe they're in a capital intensive business or a research and development business. They don't have their own capital. They need out other people's money, or else it's not going to happen. I get that. But, where a lot of professional money makes sense, if that's what you want to do, is after you've really baked the vision, you figured it out, you've gotten traction, you've even repeated it on your own, scaled it to somewhat, and now they can really put fuel on the fire to take it to another level that you just couldn't do.
Something you can't do.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes. And that's just my precise thought process, because, I'm not just getting into bed with the money. I'm getting involved with the connection.
Yeah.
Well, what if you have your own money? So what are you bringing besides that? So if you're not bringing anything that can get me to the resources that I need to go to the next 10x level, then it doesn't make sense, because what you're going to invest, I can get my hands on, right? Yeah. So it doesn't make sense to me, not at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting. Combination of access to your own capital. And listen, based upon your background, I mean, You've done it in various industries after, great recessions, COVID, you've, like many of us who've been around for more than a few years on the entrepreneurial journey, there's all the ups and downs and roller coaster rides, the folks who are overnight successes 10 years later, but nobody saw the 10 years behind the scenes. Like you've been, you've done that dance, so that, you've created something from nothing multiple times, and learned new industries. So
I was saying that could be a gift and a curse, but at this point it's a gift. I mean, I tell people like to what you said, I said, sometimes it takes 5 years of nights to be an overnight success.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing what you're saying. Yeah. A lot of people don't see it until it comes to fruition. Right. But the 20-hour, days adds to something, legitimately 20-hour days. But that's what you're willing to do when you own it, when it's yours, when it's your vision. And I don't mean own it as a piece of property. I mean, own the vision as to what it could be. And you see it and you're relentless. You won't stop. And that's what you want. It's like when I watch these shows like Shark Tank and people want to be successful part-time, I go, good luck with that.
Yeah. 100%. So in terms of the customers who, the people who are using the app who are, have adopted already or that you're targeting, who are the ideal folks for, for this business?
It's funny. I'm saying who's not, but, typically the followers for me are the 35 to 55-year-olds. That's the bracket that seems to always fall in line.
Yeah.
But, I always tell people apples fall from trees. Apples don't jump up the trees. So the kids, although I want to teach the kids, I have to teach the parents first. If that makes sense. So that's really my target. It's really it starts out as an app and a basis for the educational platform. And then it morphs into an educational digital product, like for instance, let's just say I had teachers that were well known in the stock market, people we would both know. And they were doing a session. Now I have the audience. Let's say there's 1 million people there. And I said, listen, I got Corey coming on to teach us about M&A. Who wants to be involved with that? The first 10,000 people, $35. You get to do it. We got a digital platform. Corey's speaking. Corey gets his 10 to 15% of that. And now bing, that's a revenue model, right? Yeah. It's sort of like masterclass, but only a little bit more immediate because the people that are there for what Corey's talking about.
Yeah.
They're not pushing it in an SEO strategy. It's different. So this is what's important to me because how many apps do you get a chance to meet and kind of mingle with the actual founder of the app? You don't. Is it scalable? Yes. When I get to a certain point, I'll have analysts in front of me and I want to be what is the lady from ARK Invest? What's her name? ARK Invest.
Yeah,
Kathy Woods. So I want to be what Kathy Woods to investors are to the average Joe, right? So you get access to real research. You're not bumping your head anymore and taking shots and throwing rocks at the bear, poking the bear going, what stock should I buy today? Right? No, you know the research, you know the why, you know the what, you know the how, you know the measurement, right? And as long as you know that, then you have to make your decision. But that's the place I want to be because there's no university for the average Joe. It's like this club that goes, well, if you're not willing to give me 1.25%, you can't have the information. And you don't have enough money that's not enough for us. We need you to have $500,000. But what about the guy who just wants to build his own pension, right? Because when you went from pensions to IRAs, that guy has no clue what the investment environment is. So of course, he's not going to fund his IRA. I mean, his 401k, I should say, right? He's not going to fund that. So he's not going to retire with anything worth retiring with. So my job is to kind of democratize and decode the investing for the younger people coming up in the investment. And I say young, not just relative to age, but to understanding.
Yeah. Listen, I remember in our pre-call, we talked about this on how, this is not stuff that's taught in the schools. It's not stuff that's taught. I mean, no matter what community, you're in. And I grew up as a low middle class kid in Brooklyn, and I didn't learn this stuff. My parents, fortunately, my dad got into it actually, and he didn't have a lot of money until I was in law school. He changed jobs and finally found out that he was sort of worked twice of what his, he was working for like 2 decades, right? And then he actually taught himself and invested well. And thank God, he's passed now. My mother doesn't have to worry, mainly because of my dad's, got into investments. But I didn't learn that as a kid. Whereas, David Bach, who was an early guest on a podcast, friend of mine, client, whatever, he talked about his grandma Rose, who bought him a stock when he was a kid. And now this is the guy who wrote Automatic Millionaire and 8 bestsellers around basically how you invest and compound returns, and I didn't learn that until I was well into my adulthood,
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't, the strange part is that as I said, I was an order taker at Stratton. I was an order taker earlier in my career. So I was taking orders. I wasn't putting them in for myself.
Yeah.
When I retired from the insurance business, I was like, I got all this wealth inside of me. Let me see how it works. And then I discovered I had a gumball machine inside of me. This was crazy. It was like I was at it all day and I was growing my account by leaps and bounds. And I was like, how is this? But I still couldn't take any credit for it because we're in a bull market. And then I learned all of the lessons. I learned those lessons and they were so ingrained in me that allowed me to make money and understand why. So I have a different thought process and measurement. I don't get, I always tell people about IQ, MQ, and EQ. The IQ, we know what that is, but EQ is being able to understand your investment so you're not so nervous when things go the left way. So it's like I tell people, conviction, right? It's like Dramamine. It kind of stops the ocean from moving in the muddy waters of Wall Street when you understand what you have, right? Because one man's garbage is another man's treasure, right? But you don't know it's actually treasure when you sell it down 50%. And then you turn around 2 years later, it's up 300%. And you go,
yeah,
right? So I learned a lot being where I was and didn't realize I had all the skill set. And I always used to say, man, if I would have just bought that Apple I was recommending in 1995, just 1,000 shares, be worth over 5 million. Yikes.
Yeah. And, I still have very sophisticated people who you're right. The emotional side, they panic. I mean, I think I read something. I think there are 14 days a year on average in the stock market that if you miss them, your returns are going to be like double digits lower, right? Mm-hmm. So if you try to time, it is impossible to time the market. Yeah, you can't literally. How are you going to catch this 14 days when things jump back up afterwards? So that education is important not only for younger folks but all throughout. I mean, I have some very successful business folks who still think they can time the market. And I represent hundreds of investment advisors who try to advise people against it, but again, they're only dealing with a certain slice of the population.
Yeah, it's a thought process. I see it all. Like I was on a call, it's like TikTok has been the thing that people contact me on. So I get a call, listen, I'm a retired cop and I put 750,000 into NVDL, which is the 2X shares for NVIDIA.
Yeah.
And, I'm down $250,000. I sold it. And, I'm like, I don't want to return the call. It was Sunday, but then he was like, I really don't know what to do. And I always say to myself, if you don't answer the call for help when someone says help, when you say help, what will you get? So I call him. And so I can't give him advice. I'm no longer licensed, but I say to him, listen, what's your idea of long-term? He goes 3 months to 3 years. I said, that's not long-term. So long-term is 5 years or more. Right? If you want to really look at it. Yeah. And I said, and then he starts talking to me about NVIDIA. And then lo and behold, he said NVIDIA offered him a job because he found a way to make the chips a little faster back 30 years ago, 30 years ago. And I was like, why didn't you take it? He said, because I was a cop and I wanted my pension, blah, blah, blah. And he says, I had $50,000 in both NVIDIA and AMD at around 30 cents and stuff like that. I was like, I couldn't say anything. I skipped over that because that was amazing. And then I said to him, listen, it's not about what happens today, right? A stock is going to go up, it's going to go down. Nothing goes up or down in a straight line. But what do you think the stock's going to be in 10 years? Yeah. And so when you look at the competition, I said to him, if you look at AMD, they're 10 years behind in terms of development of their software. You had ROC software in 2016, you got CUDA in 2006, 2007. Right? So there's over 5 million, software developers on NVIDIA. I said, so if they're the real, listen, they're the only game in town really for the high end, right? And although people get nervous, CapEx, where do you think it's going to be? He goes, And then I said, you sold it, so there's the wash rule, right? He says, what's that? So at that point, I'm like, yeah. Okay, so 31 days is when you can buy it back. 30 days you can't, or you don't get credit for the loss, right? So he didn't wait because he bought it back after the conversation. And then he sends me a text with, I'm up 79,000. And I go, great. He says, all the credit. I said, listen, I deserve no credit. You made the move based on the information after you did it. It's not up to me. I can't give you any advice, but long-term is undefeated. You don't have to worry about the gyrations of the market when you're long-term. Everything else is time in the market. Yeah.
Love it. Love it. All right. Well, coming to the end here. So my second to last question is just, how can people find out more about what you're doing? Can you?
Yeah. You can go to first of all, you can download the app. Let's start there. And Google App Store and Apple App Store, Investment Dojo, like karate dojo, right? Investment Dojo. And then you can go to the website, investmentdojo.com. If you're the guy that wants to play on the computer. You can follow me at Facebook Investment Dojo. You can follow me on TikTok, Investment Dojo, YouTube, Investment Dojo, LinkedIn, Investment Dojo. You get the point?
Easy enough. Investment Dojo, wherever.
Absolutely.
I love it. Kevin, my final question on the podcast is always about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom around the world from oppression for all people to why I've been an entrepreneur for decades and haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you? And how does it impact your life and business?
Wow, that's a really good question. Making the decisions that matter most for my family whenever I need to. I always tell people you'll get judged by the amount of problems you can afford to solve. And since I'm at a place where I can solve a lot of problems and I do have time to myself, even though I'm drastically busy, it's my choice to be busy, right? If I decided not to be busy, then I wouldn't be. So, that freedom to be able to say yes is more important than anything, because if I want to go somewhere, I can say yes. If I need to take care of something for my son, my daughter, my wife, I can say yes. So the freedom to say yes is probably the most valuable thing I've gained over the years. It's just the option of choice, but it's the positive side. So that would be my answer.
Love it. Kevin Davis, thanks for being such a great guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Thank you for having me, Corey. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. I want to invite you to a unique way to tap into the wisdom and experience of the DealQuest community. The Deal Den is a place where entrepreneurs, high-level executives, and business leaders come together, support each other's growth and success, and share what's working best, as well as what challenges we are facing right now. You will get input not only from me, but from all of our members. We collaborate and serve each other. To join us, go to corykupfer.com/dealden. I'll see you there. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.